Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video will be entitled Medley of Mayhem. Medley of Mayhem, also known as Potpourri of Port Authority. I'm going to review Murder Most Foul as it relates to the so-called Port Authority. You do realize that if you've been watching my videos, I am utterly convinced that we operate under maritime law, the law of the sea, admiralty law, military court-martial style law, authoritative do what I say, not what I do law. And there is no such thing as a democracy. We have no representative form of government. That's a psychops, just like our banking system. Viability is a psychological operation. If you believe in our banking system, then it's real. If you don't, then it's fake. It's just that simple. Judy Garland explained all this to us in The Wizard of Oz back in 1939, where they told you to follow the yellow brick road or the flying monkeys would get you, along with the Sacred Heart convent nuns with their big witchy hats. We had the Wicked Witch of the East named Evelyn. I said Evelyn from the East. And we had the Wicked Witch of the West, which I believe had an office at the Sacred Heart Academy on Valparaiso in Menlo Park near Sand Hill Road. And her name was Evil because she's evil. That's why they named her Evil. It's near Stanford University, where Aaron Valente was last seen alive at 2500 Sand Hill Road, meeting with a Jewish banker who didn't believe in Christianity. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that I'm going to review for you a startling number of 5,566 deaths, murders, some of which were CIA operatives who were sacrificed, murdered, killed, assassinated for cause, or in some cases without cause. When you sign up for the clandestine services, which you typically don't do voluntarily, you get what you get. Anyway, real quick, like a bunny rabbit, I'm going to go through some people who were murdered at port facilities in the United States, which is neither united nor is it states. It's 12 banking districts as a part of the world banking system. Nothing to do with any centralized federal control. There is no Fed. That's another psychops. The Federal Reserve Bank, it's a bookie operation to keep track of the credit loans made by the bankers. There are bankers, then there's poppycock, and there's the clandestine service military intelligence. That's it. And if you don't like it, you can jump overboard and good luck swimming in the ocean. Because Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein and Ron DeSantis and Gavin Newsom and Andrew Cuomo are not interested in your civil rights whatsoever. They're following orders, or else. Remember, under maritime law, we follow orders or people die. You respect the chain of command. You don't go over the head of your supervisor. And you take an oath of secrecy. And you follow whatever the mission goals are, aka world mission or job mission assignment. All right, so just to kick things off, we had the United States Maine Navy ship sunk in the port of Havana. I believe that was around February 14th, 1898. If you believe that the Spanish could surround the United States Navy ship at Anchorage and plant bombs sufficient enough to kill 266 Navy seamen, then I got a bridge to sell you. It's a Golden Gate Bridge, and I'll sell it to you for $50 a month, because you'd have to be dumber than a box of rocks to think that a bunch of Spanish scuba divers in 1898 could mine the USS Maine in the port of Havana. But that's what William Randolph Hearst newspapers said is what happened, killing, again, 266 innocent men asleep in their bunks when their ship was exploded in the port of Havana. This led to the Spanish-American War, which lasted about 4.5 months, where the United States took over the islands of the Philippines and cemented their control over Cuba. Again, this is in 1898, and the establishment of of Guantanamo Bay, which is 50 miles by 50 miles square, United States Marines, United States Navy complex. The United States controlled Cuba before this, but it was official after the USS Maine. Remember the Maine and to hell with Spain was the quote often printed in the newspapers of the day for William Randolph Hearst, who comes in and out of my stories quite a bit, along with his 34-year younger mistress girlfriend, Marion Davies, who has the name of her own cul-de-sac above the Sharon Tate murder scene, known as Davies Drive. You can't make this stuff up, people. So anyway, my first incident is the USS Maine, which was in the Port Authority, which was controlled by the United States Navy in Havana, Cuba, in 1898. Then I'll fast forward to Pearl Harbor, Honolulu. You're probably familiar with December 7th, 1941, the so-called surprise sneak attack where the Japanese repositioned 6 of their aircraft carriers. They had 8. They moved 6 to Honolulu, where they attacked the United States Arizona and Oklahoma, which were World War I circa battleships, which had no strategic value in any World War II of the Pacific. Anyway, the Japanese did not take out the power grid in Honolulu, which would have been the first thing I would have done. And I would have been more interested in the aircraft carriers, which there were 0 aircraft carriers in port at Pearl Harbor. There were 2 aircraft carriers, the Enterprise and the Lexington, were moored in Pearl Harbor a few days before the attack, the Japanese surprise attack. The Lexington, I believe, steamed out of there on Thursday morning, and the Enterprise left at approximately Saturday afternoon, just before the attack. So what a wonderful coincidence, since Navy intelligence, if you believe the poppycock story, there was no Navy intelligence. Apparently they're blind as a bat. They can't see when the Japanese Navy fleet goes through an oil embargo blockade, their own blockade, against the importation of oil to Japan, and they can't see the fleet of aircraft carriers with all the support ships. They can't see that steaming 3,000 miles to Honolulu. So I'm calling poppycock on the Pearl Harbor story, which killed approximately 2,400 mostly innocent people. And I'm going to throw that into the story because I believe that was a staged, planned military intelligence terrorist attack. Then we had John F. Kennedy. Remember him? John Kennedy was killed, of course, in Dallas, Texas, which is a port authority hub for the railroad and interstate highway system. And the kill shot that blew John Kennedy's head off was coming from the Triple Underpass railroad tracks, where there are virtually no witnesses whatsoever, and there has never been a book published, and there's never been a film produced, Oliver Silverstein Stone, I'm talking about you, which has ever featured the railroad tracks, Triple Underpass above Elm Street, which is a straight line, easy peasy shot into John Kennedy's right eyeball socket. All right. So that's in a port authority. The Pearl Harbor of Hawaii, Honolulu, that's in a port authority. The USS Maine in Havana, Cuba is in a controlled port authority controlled by the United States Navy. Then we had George Sullivan, who had the lease of the Fillmore Auditorium in San Francisco in the 1960s. He was put down with a bullet in his head at age 57 in the San Francisco Port Authority, in very close proximity where Bob Lee, a artificial intelligence, Cash App, Google software engineer, was allegedly stabbed, apparently, an apparent stabbing. Won't say what kind of knife, won't say what kind of wounds, won't give you the number of wounds, won't show you any photographs, won't give you a medical examination report. So I guess you're free to conclude he died of COVID or a ball-peen hammer into his head, because it's an apparent stabbing, not a real stabbing. So you got Bob Lee, just a few days ago, killed in the Port Authority of San Francisco near the San Francisco Bay Bridge anchorage known as Recon Hill. That's walking distance to where George Sullivan was killed on August Second, 1967, the summer of love, but not for George Sullivan. He was then shunted aside, and enter Wolf Grajonka, which you know as Bill Graham, to do concerts for Hollywood music label artists at the Fillmore Auditorium, which shares a wall with the Scottish Rites Masonic Temple at 1850 Geary Boulevard. All right, so then we have Huey Newton, who was president of the Black Panthers, which is a CIA-created organization, and he was shot in the head at around 2 o'clock in the morning. That seems to be a popular time. Tony Scott was killed around 2:30 in the morning. George Sullivan was shot in the head around 2:30 in the morning. 2:30 in the morning in a Port Authority is probably not a good place to be outside, you know, if you're working with the clandestine services, because a lot of people get shot in the head, okay, or stabbed at around 2:30 in the morning in Port Authority. So Huey Newton was killed in the Port of Oakland, the Oakland Port Authority. Tony Scott and George Sullivan were both killed in San Francisco Port Authority. You know, George Sullivan was 57 years old. Tony Scott was, Tony Scott, I'll come back to him. Bob Lee was 43 years old. Huey Newton was 47 years old. Then we have the case of Hollywood director, producer, screenwriter Tony Scott. He was 68 years old. He allegedly leaped 180 feet to his death from the Vincent Thomas Bridge in San Pedro, which is right next to the Long Beach and Los Angeles Port Authorities. That's the Los Angeles, Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach Authorities. They have 13 crane companies that are apparently turned off, and they don't unload ships. Whenever the CIA says we're going to create a fake shortage, stop unloading the containers. That's how you create a shortage. You just tell the ships to stay at anchorage, and we'll get to you in a couple of weeks. Tony Scott was, I believe, murdered on August 19, 2012. His older brother is named Sir Ridley Scott. They're both from England. They were 3 Ridley boys. Their father was a member of the Royal Army. Ridley Scott and Tony Scott both attended the Royal Academy for Art, of course. It's where all CIA MI6 agents go. Tony Scott was 68 years old, and he was living at 1500 Seabright Place, which is a dead-end cul-de-sac. He was the last home on the cul-de-sac. You should know that that is less than 1,000 meters from the Sharon Tate murder scene. He's about 500 yards away from where Doris Duke resided at 1436 Bella Drive. The home that Tony Scott was allegedly residing in Benedict Canyon when he committed suicide, leaving a suicide note in his car, his Prius car, and allegedly left a suicide note at his office. I don't know where his office was, somewhere in Beverly Hills or Hollywood. But the note, his suicide notes, left no clues as to why he killed himself. So I'm going to call those fake suicide notes, right? It's not the first time that's happened in Benedict Canyon. Remember Jean Harlow's husband, Paul Levy Byrne. He left a typed suicide note which left no clue whatsoever to why he would shoot himself in the head. He also was wearing Jean Harlow's perfume. It's kind of a funny reason. If you're going to commit suicide, why do you need to put your wife's perfume on? Remember, Jean Harlow was 21 years old, and Paul Levy was 41 years old when he blew his brains out at 9820 Easton Drive, which is very close to where Tony Scott lived, by the way. It's also close to where George Reeves was murder-suicided on Benedict Canyon Drive. It's very close. So what I'm trying to tell you is the Sharon Tate murder is close to Doris Duke's home, which is known as Falcon Lair. It's close to where Superman was killed. It's where Susan Berman was later killed execution style. It's close to Paul Levy Byrne and where Jay Sebring had provisional free housing. It's close to Tony Scott's house. It's close to Marion Davies' married other boyfriend, who was found dead on Benedict Canyon Drive, just below the Sharon Tate murder scene. Years before, I believe 1924. The home that Tony Scott lived in was referred to as Belle Vista. It was built in 1927, where King Vidor lived. King Vidor is a Hollywood director, producer, screenwriter, and he lived in the home from 1927 to 1942, when he died mysteriously early at age 60. Now scratch that. John Barrymore moved in, and he died mysteriously at age 60. John Barrymore, again, was a actor, director, producer for MGM and Paramount Pictures, and he lived in the home for quite a while. His older brother Lionel lived down on North Roxbury Drive, close by, within a kilometer away. Tony Scott produced such films as Top Gun, Days of Thunder, Crimson Tide, Enemy of the State, Last Boy Scout, and Spy Game, and also True Romance. Not really sure if that had anything to do with romance, but anyway, he produced a lot of CIA social engineering message films. He also featured the Vincent Thomas Bridge in a film he did with Denzel Washington, which was known as Unstoppable. So in other words, we're saying that Tony Scott was familiar with the Vincent Thomas Bridge, which is right where Charlie Manson was kept in federal prison at Terminal Island. It's right there. That's where Timothy Leary was kept in prison for a short time. That is where the Rolling Stones road manager, Phil Kaufman, was the cellmate for Charlie Manson, that's not his name. His name is Charlie Miles Maddox. I'd appreciate it if you call him by his name on his birth certificate, which is Maddox, not Manson. There was a Manson International subsidiary of CBS, which was their pornography division in the 1950s. That later became Carol Pictures, which was run by Oliver Stone's partners, Mario Kassar and Andrew Vajna. They ran Carol Pictures. They hired Jose Menendez from RCA because he was running the porn division for RCA. He came over to take over pornography, outsourced for CBS and RCA at Carol Pictures under the guise of live entertainment, working directly with Nolan Bloom, the number 1 purveyor and producer of porn in San Fernando Valley. Worked with Jose Menendez, with Oliver Stone's partners. Oliver Stone partnered with them for his movie The Doors. Arnold Schwarzenegger partnered with them. Don't mean to pick on Oliver Silverstein. We have Sylvester Stallone sat on the board of directors of Carol Pictures. So Sylvester Stallone is involved with these criminals, all right? But so was Arnold Schwarzenegger, and so was Oliver Silverstein Stone. Okay, so I call it like I see it. I can't exactly apologize for Oliver Silverstein. I'm still wondering why he changed his name from a Jewish name to his Buddhist name, Stone. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that there's a lot of Tony Scott that we don't know, and his older brother, who's been knighted as a Sir. He's Sir Ridley Scott. He's 85 years old. He's alive. His younger brother, Tony, was done away with at age 68 in a port authority, the Port Authority of Los Angeles. The Vincent Thomas Bridge is part of that port authority. And then we had the World Trade Center destruction. That's a port authority of the New York Port Authority. Yeah, World Trade Center buildings 1 through 12 was on the New York Port Authority. And approximately 2,900 people lost their lives on September 11, 2001. And again, this is in a port authority, fully secured, 24/7 surveilled, under military control, CIA, Spooksville, New York Port Authority. Every one of these places, the Oakland Port Authority, the San Francisco Port Authority, the Long Beach Port Authority, the Los Angeles Port Authority, the New York Port Authority, the Dallas Port Authority near Dealey Plaza and the railroad depot there, the hub and spoke model, they're all under 24 surveillance. There is no way murderers can come in there, or people planning explosive devices or transponders or whatever devices blew up the World Trade Centers could never have been positioned there without permission and CIA clearance. Just like Sharon Tate's murder could never have happened without military intelligence approval. It's impossible. And Tony Scott could not just leap off the Vincent Thomas Bridge on his own. They're not going to tolerate people parking. There's no parking area on that bridge. All right, so I guess what I wanted to tell you is that 1500 Seabright Place was the home of Tony Scott. It's really close to Falcon Lair, which is 1436 Bella Drive, which is really close to the Invisible House, which is 10060 Cielo Drive, which has no parking or garage access on Cielo Drive. It also doesn't have it on Bella Drive, but it has a long driveway that goes into a tunnel and then pops out to a multiple garage roundabout with a fountain. And again, this is in close proximity to Tony Scott and Doris Duke and the Sharon Tate murder scene, which is now owned by Jeffrey Franklin, who was the television producer for Full House, which the star was Bob Saget, who was conked on the head in Orlando Four Seasons Hotel, mysteriously, early in 2022. You see, that's who gets these homes, right? The home that Tony Scott was residing, only 3 people lived in it. We had King Vidor, who's a Hollywood producer-director. Then we had John Barrymore, who's a producer-director. Then we had Tony Scott, who's a producer-director. So that's who owns that or gets to use that home. They say the home's worth $30 million. It doesn't matter. It's not available. Unless you're a Hollywood producer-director, you're not going to live in that home. And you're not going to live on Cielo Drive murder scene unless your name is Jeffrey Franklin or some television producer of social engineering content, because that's who gets to be the fake owner of that home. Because the home has no real owner and no one actually lives in that home. Would you want to live in a murder scene? Would you want to live in the place where Jose Menendez was put down with shotguns at 722 North Elm Drive? No. But then William Link moves in and he's the producer of Columbo. Sounds like a cult to me, people. All right, that's my Potpourri Port Authority. If you add up all the deaths from all of these incidences, you will come up with 5,566 deaths that occurred in port facilities. You're talking about the USS Maine, Pearl Harbor, John F. Kennedy assassination, World Trade Center destruction, George Sullivan's murder in San Francisco, Huey Newton's murder in the Port of Oakland. Okay? You're talking about Tony Scott being thrown off the Vincent Thomas Bridge, talking about Bob Lee's apparent stabbing in the San Francisco Port Authority, also known as Recon Hill. That's 8 incidences and 5,566 dead Americans from port authorities. That's a heck of a potpourri or a medley of mayhem, in my opinion. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Please hit the like and subscribe and share my videos because I am shadow banned. Take care.